Welcome. Can you hear me? Oh, I'm going to look over and now is when my dog decides to start barking. Never fails, you guys. Never fails. So anyway, hi everybody. It's so cool to see everybody in the chat. I love this interface. Welcome to our latest TueNighter tea with Issa Mas, which is all about her brand new book, Grief Thoughts, Brief Anecdotes about Profound Loss, which is unbelievable. And I'm so excited for you to hear more about it and to hear more from Issa, who I've known for several years now and has written for TueNight. And I'll tell you about TueNight in a second, but she's written for TueNight anyway. So just welcome and feel free to jump in the chat and ask us questions. There's also a little button down there that says ask a question, and you can do that. But yeah, so I'm Margit. I'm the founder of TueNight. We are a platform for grown-ass women or GenX women or women over 40. The lot of us that were born, kind of 60s, essentially 70s, I think. Yeah, so we have a storytelling website. We have a wonderful newsletter called The To-Do List, which comes out every Tuesday, naturally. And we have a community called the TueNighters, which I know many of you are members of. And it helps, we have a membership for that, and that helps to fund events like this and keep them free. So yeah, we're just really excited you're here. Let's see, what other things do I want to tell you? Yeah, so we talked about questions. You can chat. I think without further ado, I am just going to bring up Issa and tell you a little bit about her. Oh, one other thing, sorry. If you have any trouble with the recording, sometimes things can get a little wonky. Just message us in the chat. Jackie, who is womaning the TueNight handle tonight, will definitely help you out. And this recording will live on in Crowdcast and in TueNighters.com. So if you need to jump out early, if you came in late, if you aren't here, I guess you won't hear this message, but yeah, it will live on so you can watch it anytime, which is one of the nice things about this platform. Yeah, and let's see. So let me tell you a little bit about Issa. Issa Mas is an author, essayist, and the voice behind the now defunct but award-winning single motherhood blog, Single Mama NYC. You can find her essays in TueNight, Romper, and Raising Mothers, among other literary publications. She lives here in New York City with her 14-year-old son, Theodore, and their dog, Jake. As a 20-year practicing Buddhist, she brings a wealth of wisdom and loving kindness to the lives of others. But as an over 40-year native New Yorker, her prolific use of profanity will never end. We love that. That is classic Gen X. So without further ado, let's bring up Issa. Yay! Welcome, Issa. Hi. How are you?
It's so funny because I forgot to ask you prior to this, is cursing allowed? Like, do we
is what?
Oh, cursing allowed?
Hell yeah.
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
Okay, because I would have to really make an effort not to, put it that way.
Okay. I think I would too.
I would have to put on my G-rated hat, like there are children in there, small children in the movies that like protect,
Yeah, no, I don't think we have any tonight. And if they are, well, they're indoctrinated into our world. So yeah, so yeah, this is, our TueNighter tea, and I usually ask the person what tea they're drinking. I have to be honest, I have my RBG mug, but it's got Diet Coke in it because I am really with that she left because I am like tired. I had a long day, and I shouldn't even tell you this, but I am sleepy. But now I'm not now because I have Diet Coke.
Well, I usually love a good peppermint tea, but I have water because I was running around like a lunatic all day and literally didn't even have a chance to like make some tea. So that's fine. Water will do. It's fine.
It's much better choice. Well, I just want to say your book is absolutely wonderful. It's, you know, it's the kind of book that I can see having just like nearby for the rest of my life, like as somebody who, I think as Gen Xers, women in our 40s, it's this moment. I hear this all the time from our community. It's this moment where we start to experience a lot of loss, whether it's people close to us in our lives that have passed away, whether it's friendships, whether it's even just all kinds of things, pets, experiences, kind of how we think about ourselves. And so I just want to say first off that I just thought it was such a powerful book, and I hope everybody clicks the link there. It says "Purchase Grief Thoughts" down at the bottom, and buys it. It's relatively short. It's a very, I don't want to say it's an easy read, but it's like, and we'll talk about how, I want to ask you about how you structured it, but it's just a wonderful glimpse into and into grief, like, goes deep. And then there's just moments that are like, wow, quick and just hit you right in the gut. So thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
And I think before we jump into questions, Issa, we would love to have you read an excerpt from your book.
Okay. I am going to read the prologue because I think that, like you said, a lot of the entries are just sort of quick and dirty, quick and painful.
All right. I'm reading the prologue to the book. Leonardo Lenny Mas was many things, all of them layered and complicated. He spent his life wanting to protect the world from the bad guys, having spent his childhood living with the worst bad guy of all, his own father. Despite experiencing horrific child abuse, he swore he'd do things differently with his own child, and that he did, for the most part. Being the child of a child abuse survivor is a unique blend of inheriting dysfunction, and if you're lucky, being grateful things were nowhere near as bad for you as they were for them, because they worked so hard to break the cycle. In many ways, he did break the cycle, and alas, in some ways, he couldn't help but to perpetuate the impossibly exacting standards that was the scaffold of his painful relationship with his father. My job, especially since his passing, has been to balance out the ways in which his upbringing inadvertently harmed me, with the ways his devotion to me consistently provided protection, support, pride, and so much love. This book is dedicated to those who grieve complicated people. We cannot and should not canonize them in their absence, because healing lies within truth. We cannot and should not vilify them either, because the truth is, they tried so very hard, and for that, they should be honored.
Yes, so beautiful. There it is. And that's your dad on the cover,
on
right?
my 4th birthday in 1977.
Oh, wow.
Hence the,
wow.
You want to hear a funny story? Okay, so
yes.
I have TikTok, but I've never used it before. I've never posted. I've used it to watch videos, but I've never posted. So I posted my very first TikTok video a couple of days ago, and they cited it for child harm. And I'm like, why would they cite it for child harm? Like, what? And then I realized in 1977, this was an appropriate outfit for a 4-year-old. In 2021, some strange man holding a kid with a little,
oh my God,
little hot pants. Maybe not so much. So
oh my gosh.
I did it. I sent it again, and I guess they actually reviewed it and looked at what it was and realized it was a book, and they accepted it again. But I was like, child harm. What are they even talking?
That's crazy.
It took me a minute to realize. Yeah, the outfit, right?
Yeah, we definitely. Yeah, I remember having like Daisy Dukes when I was 12, and candy shoes. And
all that you
good
can't
stuff.
see it, but there's these tiny little red hot pants matching.
Oh, nice.
The little halter. Yeah. Totally appropriate in 1977.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, you paint this beautiful portrait of your father in the book. And there's a lot of writers in the audience, I think. And I wanted to ask you, you chose to do the book in these kind of just varying sizes of sort of moments, and these kind of fleeting moments that feel like the way I think grief is experienced, in every, in a daily way, a minute by minute way, just these moments. And I wanted to ask you sort of what was the inspiration for writing it in that structure?
I initially had started out a much different memoir. I was working with an agent, and what she wanted me to write was going to involve way too much mining of emotion for it to be a quick process. I would write, it would be sort of overwhelming. I'd have to stop, I'd have to step aside, I'd come back. And it's this sort of long, kind of painful process, right? When you're mining your grief and your pain and all of these things for the writing. And then it just sort of struck me that I had been chronicling this process since it started via social media, via blog posts and essays and, social media posts. And it occurred to me that if I just went back and looked at all of those posts and put them in chronological order, that the picture would emerge. And I wasn't 100% sure that it would work. But the day that I was done and I read back and it all sort of seemed to flow, it just worked. It just worked somehow. Yeah. So literally that first entry of the grief thoughts where it says, the second one where it says, he's gone. That day, those first two entries are the day that he passed away. And those were my Facebook posts. And other pages, other thoughts were Facebook posts, journal entries, small essays that I'd written for publication. It just, it dawned on me that I already had all the words that I needed to express this in a way that would connect with people. And that's really what I wanted to do, was connect with people.
Oh, so it's very connecting. And it's interesting. Also, it sort of builds, I think, towards the end, there's a little bit of a sort of, who is this man who passed away? And I think we get a clear picture as we go along. There's sort of really, I think, storytelling in the way you've structured it and organized it, that, about like midway through, you're like, oh, wow, you start to, it really picks up steam and you start to understand a little bit more about him. Can you talk about your dad is also was a cop, right? And pulled folks out of at 9/11. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that. But what an amazing
absolutely.
Human being.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was a police officer. He started with the city, and then when I was 10, he went from the city to the feds. And the federal police, people don't know, but there's actually not FBI, there are police on the federal level. Just like there's state troopers, there's federal cops. And his office was at 26 Federal Plaza, which is right down by World Trade Center. And so when it happened, he of course ran down there, ran in, pulled four people. It was just a wall of smoke. He said there was smoke. You could not see, you could not breathe. He would run in, he would reach out, he would feel somebody, he'd grab them, he'd run them out. And then he did that 4 times before he came out and collapsed. And then proceeded to fight his partners because he wanted to go back in. And they were like, dude, you can't even stand. And he's like, get off, there's more people in there. That was my dad.
A real hero.
That was my dad. Yeah. And he was actually the first responding officer at the first World Trade Center bombing in 1993.
Wow.
Yeah. So he's actually, as of his passing, I don't know if that's changed yet, but as of his passing, he is the only officer, the only federal officer to receive 2 medals of valor on the same day. For
Oh my gosh.
His acts of bravery. Yeah, he was a badass. he was a badass. He was a Vietnam era Marine. And he was the quintessential baby boomer, sort of toxic masculinity, brass set of balls sort of guy. And so we fought a lot about a lot. The great thing about my dad was he used to tell people all the time, and now mind you, I just told you what my dad did, right? He used to tell people all the time, the only person on this planet who has balls as big as me is my daughter. Because I'd be the only one who'd stand up to him, like, no, sorry, that's wrong, And he'd be like, well, what do you, I'd get all fussed, like, yeah, no, sorry, you're wrong. And we'd fight. And he'd fight me. And then afterwards, you see, he talked to me and used language that I'd given him or shift his perspective a little. And to see how much he valued what I brought, to the table for him, and seeing this very old dog change his sort of ways. I don't really believe in the whole, you can't teach old dogs new tricks anymore because of him, because I saw him change. Yeah, I did. I saw, and he was a stubborn old fuck, man. And if he could change, anybody could change,
Yeah.
So it was an interesting upbringing with that man.
Yeah. Well, and what is it like, that kind of complicated piece of it where you have this complicated relationship with somebody, and how you, I think maybe we all have those complicated relationships with people, especially our parents. But how does that sort of, how does that reflect in the grief? You talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's why I mentioned that in the prologue, because I think what people do when people we love pass is we either canonize them or we throw them away, right? We completely vilify them and we make them this monster, which, they may have been. It's not for me to say that they were or they weren't. Or they take this really complicated, really flawed individual and they canonize them and they make it so that they had no flaws and they were perfect. And I don't think either one of those things does any service to your healing. Even if your parents are alive, most of us are still healing from our parents on some level, right? Even if they were amazing parents, even if they were the most loving, caring, giving, amazing human beings, we have to understand that they came from a completely different time. They had completely different perspectives on child rearing, on the world, on race, on, class, all these different things. And they inadvertently caused us harm. They didn't mean to, but they did, right? And so many of us are healing from our childhoods and our parents' parenting anyway.
Right.
And the only way you can do that is to be honest, right? And so here you have that healing faced with grief and the enmeshment of that. The only way you can do that is in the and, right? They were really complicated and they caused me this damage, and they loved me and they supported me and they were amazing. And I have all of these amazing attributes because of that person. It's not one or the other most of the time. And I think that it's hard to be in that nuanced area, right? Because as humans, we tend to do one or the other. They were either all bad or all good. But I think for the most part, if we're honest, most parents are neither, right? They're not all bad or all good. They're somewhere in between. And when they pass, you have to really see them for who they are, to mourn the person that they were, not the ideal of the parent that they were, to really see them for who they are. And I think for those who are parents, it becomes even more complicated and nuanced, because you start to see, like, I adore my child. I love him more than anything in the world. And I have spent the last 14 years of my life fully invested in this kid. And I think I do an amazing job, and I guarantee you I'm fucking this kid up on some level. Like on some level, he is going to go to therapy one day, like, and my mom this, and he won't be wrong.
Right.
He won't be wrong. Right. So to be honest about that, I think is really important, especially when you're grieving.
Yeah. Some of the most touching moments in the book are Theo and his comments to you about, you know, your dad and sort of caregiving you a little bit.
Yeah.
Walking out of the room when you're upset and giving you space. It's very mature, you know, in a way. Like, tell us about that and how, you know, is there a way, did you learn anything about how to sort of grieve with your son or give him the tools to process?
You know, that was really difficult for me in the beginning because I was really scared about parentifying him, right? Like I didn't want him to take on, he was only 8 years old when my dad died. I did not want him to take on the responsibility for my emotional well-being. I didn't want him to worry about me.
Yeah.
But also being cognizant of the fact that I'm raising a child who identifies himself as male and who identifies himself as straight. And so he's going to grow up and he's going to be in relationship with women. I want him to be able to sit with someone when she's crying and when she's grieving and not walk out on her, right?
Yep.
And so being able to balance that, right? Being able to allow him to get up and walk away sometimes when it was too much, but also to be able to sit down with him and say, you know, well, what's going on? How do you feel about what just happened and what's going on with you? And I had him in therapy just to make sure that he was okay, you know, and it was difficult. It was difficult for me in the beginning. Now, I mean, all these years later, we're fine. But in the beginning, it was hard for me because I was so scared that I would make him feel in any way responsible for me being okay. I didn't want him to carry that burden. He was only 8 years old. I mean, I wouldn't want him to do that now at 14, much less at 8.
No. Yeah. You talk about the cult of positivity in your book, and that also really struck me. And I think we posted on Instagram one of your quotes about from your therapist. Your therapist sounds amazing, by the way. I'm just like, I want your therapist.
Well,
Sounds
she left. I had her for a year after my dad passed, and then she had to leave the practice, and I couldn't follow her because she was going to like a substance abuse clinic, and I'm like, do I start heroin just to follow her? I don't know, probably not, you know.
Probably not. Yeah.
Probably not a good idea. So, you know, so I sort of lost her a year after my dad died, which was really, really hard for me because I had started her only about maybe 5 or 6 months prior to when he passed. We hit it off immediately. She was so amazing. So amazing. And you know, therapy is like any relationship, right? You have to, I tell people all the time, you have to find the right one. I've gone to a therapist and like 2 sessions in, it's like, oh, this is awful. This is not going to work at all. She was amazing. Like you said in the quote that you posted, you know, I was in a moment in which, as many people who are in the midst of grief often feel, especially in the beginning, this horrible, heart-rending thing has happened. And you want the world to stop and honor this. And they're just going along, buying their coffees, going to their movies, and treating you the same way. And you're not the same. You will never, ever be the same. And there was this, you know, I joke, but it's not a joke. I get why Queen Victoria wore black for 40 years. Get the fuck away from me. You know, leave me the fuck alone.
Yep.
Like, they said the parliament had to literally drag her out of her quarters. And so she would come and address parliament. She was like, fuck parliament. Fuck the country. I don't give a shit. Like, the love of my life is dead. Kiss my royal ass. You know? And I get that, right? Like, you just want the world to stop. Why is everybody okay? right? And so that idea of wearing your grief on the outside was so important for me, because it felt stifling to me how quickly everybody wanted me to get back to normal. It just wasn't doable. I was faking it. And I wasn't doing a very good job of faking it at all anyway. And it's so profoundly disrespectful to the bereaved, because no one gets to decide how long that person is in pain for, you know? I think we have this really strange sort of I don't know if it's if it's American culture. I don't know if it's European culture, but this whole stiff upper lip, you know, don't emote, don't show what's going on inside. So damaging, so damaging. In the Middle East, people actually came, they wail, they scream, you know, and it seems foreign, it seems like almost overwrought, but it's not. It's just letting it out, right? And so I think for me, a part of writing the book was that it was over and over again me making sure that anyone who was reading the book got the sense that it was okay for them to be exactly where they were, wherever they were, whether it was curled up in the fetal position or, you know, faking it until they made it until the end of the day where they could come home and, like, you know, drink their tea or whatever, you know, wherever you are is okay, you know.
Do you have any like go-to phrases you would say to people, you know, like who would come to you and say, you're still grieving, like haven't you gotten over it yet, or sort of trying to inject that cult of positivity into you when you're just like, look, I'm still in this place? And like, did you have any sort of canned phrases that you would say to people?
Fuck off, leave me the fuck alone.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm gonna grieve for as long as I fucking want, kiss my ass, you know, like I'd
totally
get angry. I'd get really really angry to the point where people stopped saying shit to me and just left me alone, you know. Sometimes being a New Yorker,
it works for handy. That's right. And I love this part. I sort of highlighted some things in my Kindle. You say it's not about releasing or letting go of our shitty inner voices. It's about offering those voices compassion while also not believing them. I thought that was so touching, and that was a game changer for you. Can you say more about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, you know, all of us, or so many of us, I should say, have this awful voice in our heads, right? Whether it's because we had a very demanding parent, or if, you know, whether it's societal standards or whatever it may be. So many of us have this voice in our heads that are constantly berating us and belittling us and demeaning us. And what people do to get free from that, which makes complete sense, is that they make it the enemy, right? You hear things like, I'm not going to listen to that bitch. How kiss my eye, she can go away, and blah, blah, blah. And the problem with that is that when you pit yourself, and I did that, that was my first step into, I don't want to listen to this voice anymore, which I think is a necessary step, right? To sort of divorce yourself from that voice and not listen to it and not believe it. But then at some point you have to realize that that voice is a voice that comes from a place of fear and anxiety and scarcity, and what those voices need is compassion. You can't beat up this voice and make it go away. You really have to just sit down with it and say, I get where you're coming from. I understand where this is, you know, coming from, but we're okay now. Like, we're not 4, we're not 7.
Right.
We're in our 40s and 50s. We're okay now. And befriend that voice, hear what it has to say. It might have some valuable information. It might not. But instead of vilifying it, sort of, I wouldn't even say make friends with it, but just don't make an enemy of it. And have compassion for it. You don't have to believe what it it's telling you, it's probably
Mm-hmm.
telling you, you know, lies based on anxiety or fear, whatever. But that transition between setting that voice up as a villain, so that way you don't listen to it anymore, into the next level of now you can have compassion for it. You know, I speak every now and then, because I don't like to get into religion and stuff like that. I know that's a sort of taboo topic, but I am a Buddhist, and it has informed my life for the better, for the past 20 odd years. And one of the things that is, you know, one of the tenets of Buddhism is compassion for others, compassion for self. And I realized after this sort of these last 6 years that the thing that I was woefully, you know, not giving myself was grace and compassion. And paradoxically, the more grace and compassion I gave myself, the more I was able to be and do and experience the things that self-flagellation was keeping me from, if that makes
Right. That's beautiful. Yeah. You have a hard time wish list that I think you're gonna run us through.
Yes.
You want to share that and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So everyone here who has experienced the death of someone you love, I'm sure you've had really well-meaning people say, okay, well, what do you need? How can I help? And when you're in the middle of a crisis, you often can't answer that question because your brain's like, I fucking need that person back, but they're dead and they're not coming back. So I didn't even know how to answer this question, right? Like, it's just like, I don't know. I need the pain to stop. You can stop there, you know, you don't know how to answer that. And so what I've found is that if you can, even now, I invite you all now to either open up a your notes field, your notes app in your phone, or even just you know, a pad and a pen. And I call it my hard time wish list. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it my you know, what I'd like, whatever you want to call it. And make a running list of the things that you would like. Make a running list of the things that might bring you a little bit of joy. So let's say you have children. Could you use a friend to come over for an afternoon and, you know, take your kids to the park for a couple of hours so you could have some time to yourself or have some alone time with your partner? Put that on the list. Could you, you know, use a friend to meet with you and just have a coffee and maybe walk through the park so you could just vent and talk and get outside? Put that on the list. Do you need meals? Is the idea of I know for me, the idea of just the thought of cooking was like, absolutely the fuck not. I'm not cooking. I'm not doing that. And the people who sent me coupons for the delivery apps, you know, gift codes for the delivery apps, or you know, gift certs for restaurants in the neighborhood or whatever. If meals are an issue for now, you don't want to cook, put that down. If your house is a mess and you keep staring at the same mess over and over again, and you're like, I need to clean this house, but you have zero energy because you're in the midst of grief, put clean house on the list. Do you love getting manicure and pedicures? I love getting manicures and pedicures. That's my self-care kind of thing. I even wrote about that for TueNight.
Yes,
right?
you did.
You know, I would put manicure and pedicure. The year anniversary of my father's passing, my best friend came over the house and got me dressed and took me to the nail salon because she knew that, you know, manicure and pedicures are my thing. So she took me to the nail salon. She got me a manicure and pedicure. You know, the other thing that she would do, which at first made me feel so embarrassed, and then after not too long of a while made me feel so overwhelmingly loved, was she would come over to the house, and invariably there'd be dishes in the sink piled high. And she'd come into the kitchen, she'd literally roll up her sleeves and she'd start washing my dishes. And the first couple of times she did it, I just felt so much shame. Like, my house is a mess. And because we're New Yorkers and because we're Latina and we're sort of tough, I'd be like, no, don't do this. She'd like, shut up. Just sit there and let me wash these damn dishes. And I'm like,
that's a friend. That's a good friend.
Things like that. Whatever it is that you feel that you could do. If you do it now, when the crisis hits, you won't be so flustered, right? So I invite you to, throughout the course of your days, when things hit you, like, oh, I would love to see, now that things are opening up again, I would love to see a comedy show, or I would love to go to a concert, or I would like to have a meal in a restaurant. I haven't had a meal inside of a restaurant since March of 2020. Like, I'd love to do that. Whatever occurs to you, write it down. Keep a running list. Because I hate to say this, but grief will come again. It just will. That's life. Crises will come again. It's just life, right? And if you have this list, oftentimes the people who say, how can I help? What can I do? They really do mean it. They just have no idea what to do. They're really asking you for direction. And obviously, it's not fair to ask you that in the moment because you're overwhelmed.
Right.
But they really do mean well. And so if you have this list and somebody says, oh my God, I heard this thing, what can I do? And you say, well, I have this running list of things that I would love. And they say, oh, can you please send it to me? And you send it to them. They get to choose what they can do on the list.
Yep.
They get to give you something that's meaningful to you because you've already identified that it's something that you want. And you get to accept community care. I think that for people who are like me, who tend to isolate, I isolate, which is not okay. But I isolate. And so for people who tend to isolate, this is a great way to just shoot them the list, shoot them the running list. You can even add them to the list so they can see as you add to it.
Do a Google Doc.
Yeah, do a Google Doc.
Well, just to jump in, because I, as somebody who went through cancer, same exact thing. And had I in advance, done a list, like that, it's just, there's so much I relate to with this, I think I would just add like meal train. That was something super helpful for me, just, making it easy for people. Cause as you said, your friends want to help, and it's a lot easier to just almost like delegate that stuff to an app or to your list, where you can just forward it to them and just say, here you go, rather than the constant, like, what can I do to help? So I think that's fantastic.
That's a great point. It doesn't have to be just grief. It could be during illness. It could be, job loss. It could be, it's life, right? Like, there are myriad ways in which life can kick your ass, right? So,
oh yeah,
this
is true.
So having this, I wish I had thought of it when I was grieving. I'm glad that I thought of it now because, like I said, there will always be opportunities in life to use it again. But also, it's really important for me to share that because I know a lot of people in the midst of grief, they don't, how do you answer that, right? Like, how do you answer that? It's too overwhelming. And you don't even have to be in the midst of fresh grief. For anybody who has experienced that, we know that it comes in waves. You could be fine. It can be months, it could be years.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're bowled over by the loss. It could be, an upcoming anniversary of their passing or their birthday or a day that's meaningful. There's a person in my Grief Thoughts group that posted on her own page about the other day about her husband. Her husband passed last year, and it was the anniversary of the day that they met. you know, on a day like that, do you want to get out of bed? Do you want to cook? Do you want to do, you don't want to do
Right.
shit. You know, you probably want to just
No.
lay in bed and like either watch movies you used to watch together or cry or whatever. Right. And so having that there for people that know, right? Like I said, my best friend, my father's upcoming death anniversary is coming up, and she had already planned it. Like she was going to take me out and get my nails done and stuff like that. It just helps people, I think. So I hope that you'll all use that. I hope that you'll write your list. It's not, I hope it doesn't feel morbid, like, oh, well, I'm getting ready for the next thing that's going to slap me upside the head. But, you know, it's sort of like insurance, right? Like you don't want to have it, but you don't want to need it, but it's good to have it. Right. So,
yeah, no, I think that's great. And I want to actually do a shout out for your community on Facebook, right? I don't think we mentioned that yet. Maybe just say
it's named after the book.
I want to get to questions in a second, but maybe tell
really
folks about
horrible
that.
at reading comments as
I got it for you.
So I'm not ignoring you guys. What I figured what I would do is come back to I'm shite at doing real time reading of the comments. So I apologize, but I will get over there. Yeah, so we have a group on Facebook called Grief. It's called Grief Thoughts after the book. And it's just a place where people can feel comfortable talking about their grief. Unfortunately, society is still not comfortable talking about grief, which is one of the main reasons why I wrote this book. Because when people are grieving and they go to look for a book, they often get met with like handbooks, like how to grieve, right? Which is absolutely absurd because there is no how to grieve. You know, there's things that you can avoid, like please don't drink an entire bottle of tequila, right? Like there's maladaptive ways of dealing with grief that you kind of want to avoid if at all possible. But it all sort of felt very clinical. And the heart of it felt a little bit divorced from the things that were out there by and large. I mean, there are people who are doing great things around grief, don't get me wrong, but the conversations seem to be sort of lacking in general. And this space where people who are grieving, again, whether it's fresh or whether it's this wave of, you know, my husband died and this is the first anniversary or whatever, it's a place where people can just lay down that grief and nobody looks at them like, it's been 7 years. Like, are you serious? Like, you know, and the great thing about this group is, which I love so much, is that it talks about all kinds of grief. So we've covered the grieving of people. We've covered the grieving of pets. We've covered the grieving of, one person wrote about the grief over the fact that her children are grown and her babies don't need her anymore. The grief of being that mama, right? That mama bear to her babies. Her babies are like, her youngest is 25.
Yeah.
So she's like not me and grieving that life. You know, grieving the idea of what your life was going to be at this age. How many of us look at our lives at, I'll be 49 in May. And, you know, I'm grateful for my life. I love everything in my life. Is this the life that I thought I'd have? Absolutely not. And there are certain things that are even better, but there are certain things that I still wish that I could have achieved that I feel like that window has closed. And grieving that, right? There are many women who thought, oh, I wanted to have kids, but now I'm like 52 and it's probably not ever going to happen. And grieving the reality that, wow, I'm not going to be a mom, you know, and what that feels like. So all these different forms of grief are welcome there and are met with real compassion. And so I love that. I really do.
That's wonderful. So Carrie has a question. She says, my dad passed in November at 81. He was sick for years, so we were prepared, but not really. We never are. Thankfully, we said our I love yous and goodbyes, and he apologized for his bullshit, and I forgave him. So his passing was peaceful for me, but I'm contending with good and bad memories. So my question is, how do I contend with the father my dad wanted to be and the dad that he was?
Oh, that is a great question, Carrie. You know, I think that they are one and the same, right? Like, how many times do we wish that we would have been different? How many times do we wish that we could have answered things differently or been different? Again, it's that compassion for just him as a human being. And it's not to say that he gets a pass on anything that he did that was harmful to you at all. But just really seeing it for who he was and kind of having compassion around the idea of, wow, what it must be like to want to be this thing, but not be able to because of whatever patterns and conditioning he grew up with, right? I don't think that there's a simple answer. I think the answer lies in the nuance. For me, it's been in the nuance. Allowing myself to get really pissed off at the ways in which he inadvertently harmed me, and allowing myself to get really pissed off about the ways in which I could have been different, or I could have been healthier, or I could have achieved different things had he not been who he was. But also having an immensity of compassion for the realization that, like you at the end, he was broken by the idea that anything that he had ever done had hurt me. Whenever I brought up shit that he did, he literally would bawl. Now, this man, I had never seen him cry. This man, balls of steel, okay? And I would see him just bawl because the reality of, shit, I tried so hard and I still fucked up. Being able to see that pain in him just allowed me to forgive what it was that he did, because it was clear to me that it wasn't intentional. Had he been like this really cold-hearted, self-centered, narcissistic bastard, I would have been like, fuck you, you know what I mean? But I mean, he wasn't. And it doesn't sound like your dad was either. It sounds like he realized, like you said, he realized his bullshit and he apologized for it. You get to mourn who you think you could have been had you had a father that was a bit different. You get to mourn her. You get to mourn the father that you wish you had had. You get to mourn that too. And you get to mourn the father that you had with all of his complexities and nuances. I think the real answer is always in the and. We like to sort of, it's either one or the other, but they could be really profoundly complicated beings that caused us harm, and they could be really complicated human beings that were harmed. And so they were just perpetuating that in ways that weren't very specific to you. Carrying that duality, carrying that nuance is, for me, what's allowed me to move through the anger phase of all the things that I wish he had done differently into the acceptance phase of, this is who he was. He did the very best he could. Damn, I wish he could have done differently, but I'm grateful for the fact that I was able to see him for the flawed human being that he was and still find myself able to love him regardless. I hope that helps.
That's great. Jackie asked in the question and answer section, she said, other than remembering birthdays and anniversaries, how can we help friends navigate their loss as time goes on? And I know those are hard too, right? Like those moments of those anniversaries and birthdays are sort of triggering in some way.
Yeah, and I think they're so specific to the person, because there are some people who will say, please talk about my deceased loved one. Please talk to me about them. Don't be afraid to talk to me about them because you think it'll hurt me. You think it'll, drudge up all of these painful memories. Please talk to me about them. If you have memories of the person, talk to me about that. If you want to ask me about my memories, please talk to me about that. Keep them alive in that way. And then there's certain people who don't even want to touch it. Like they just want to go out and go shake their ass at a club and drink and it's really sort of personal. I think knowing your friend or your loved one and getting a sense for what would make sense for them individually is really key. But But I find that for me, what's really been the most impactful is just the fact that you remembered, right? The fact that you remembered that this was the anniversary. Like for me, nobody ever remembers my father's death date, but everybody remembers 9/11, right? How could you not? So I get flooded on 9/11 with texts and calls and emails and Facebook posts and, you know, Twitter. And at first it was like too much. It was a barrage, right? It was just like, this is too much. But eventually I realized that this was an homage, right? It was a way to celebrate him and to remember him. Because my father was not the kind of person to go gentle into that good night, right? It's like he raged. And for a person like that, you don't want to just turn off the light. You want to spotlight. You want to, you know, really want to you want to shine a light on that person. So I think all that to say, it's really important to know your friend, your loved one, and to know, you know, what would be helpful for them. Do they want you to come over with a bottle of wine or a box of tea and, you know, just talk, watch a movie, or they kind of want to go out and have fun, do they want to cry? It's really, really specific to the person. But again, at the end of the day, just acknowledging the fact that you know that this anniversary is upcoming and that it's impactful to them and that you're there if they want to listen, that means everything. It really does.
That's great. We have one more from Amy who says, society insists that we will regret not reconciling with an estranged parent and pushes it, but it isn't always the solution. My dad is dead, and I'm glad I didn't try to reconcile because I was protecting myself and my children. I don't necessarily know if I have a question, but maybe it's just looking for understanding that sometimes there isn't an and.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. When I talk about the nuance of holding my father in compassion, it's because I know that everything that he did was inadvertent. Had I ever gotten even the slightest inkling that he didn't give a shit and that he was narcissistic and that he hurt me and he could have fucked right off. Trust me, he could have fucked right off into the sun. I don't hold space for abusers. I never have, and I never will. So if your parent was an abuser, if they were narcissistic, if they harmed you intentionally, and your choice was to not reconcile with them, good for you. You did exactly what you needed to do. You did the absolute best thing for yourself. So I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying as a pass for parents who were harmful intentionally. Absolutely not. You know, I'm able to hold that space for my father, and I'm able to hold that nuance for my father because I know that all of the things that he did was because he was horrifically abused as a child. And it doesn't matter how well you think you've gotten out of that pattern. My father was a baby boomer, did not really do therapy. He was a Marine, like therapy, no, right? So he did not heal from that. He did not work through those issues of being abused as a child. Did he beat me? Like did he hit me? No, he didn't hit me, but all the other things sort of came out. You know, very, very exacting, very, you know, high standards, and there's no, you know, no margin for error, and, you know, but none of that was because he wanted to hurt me. All of that was because he was held in this pattern of abuse, and he didn't really know any other way to be a parent, right? He thought that he was loving me because he was the tough, masculine provider, father figure. He didn't know any better. And to the extent that as I got older, when I would speak up, you know, he would be sort of shocked at the realization that, oh shit, I dropped the ball. I didn't think I had. Now, had he not met me with that energy, and had he not shown me that he was always trying to do better, again, I wouldn't be here having this conversation. I probably wouldn't have written the book either, right? So please don't mistake me and misunderstand me. I am not at all holding space for anybody who's an abuser. And if that was the case, I'm sorry for your loss, because that's a different kind of loss. Because I know personally people whose parents have died during estrangement, and that brings an altogether different kind of grief. You're grieving the loss of when they're alive, even if you're estranged, the little kid in you still hopes that maybe they could come around, or maybe they'll have an epiphany and they'll come crawling on their hands and knees and beg for forgiveness, right? You can't help that. The little kid always wants that. But when they die, that chance is gone. It's done. You'll never have that opportunity for him to, for that redemption. And so that's its own grief that you should absolutely, acknowledge and have the right to experience and to have tended to, right?
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
grieve
much.
for the little girl who thought her daddy was great. Absolutely. I absolutely get that. Absolutely. I think all women at some point have a moment of grief when they realize that this hero of their father as a hero, they're actually not this great big hero. There's this very flawed human being. And then, if you add to that, if they were, abusive or narcissistic, you have to allow that little girl to grieve that. You have to allow that little girl to grieve the loss of the father that she never had, and now for certain never ever will. Very, very profound loss. And I hope that you have support in that, because that's its own set of grief that it brings up.
Yep. Well, we are a little bit over, but I know we kind of had a little bit of a rocky start. So I want to see, is there any other question that anyone has? I'm just kind of scrolling through here. I think that was it. Issa, I want to thank you so much for joining our TueNighters crew with this really important topic that just is so far reaching. And I want to implore people to buy her book, because it is really, truly wonderful. You'll get a lot out of it on so many fronts, whatever you might be grieving or may in the future, or have friends who are. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And please, if you're not a TueNighter member, you know where to find us at TueNighters.com. Or if you're not a newsletter subscriber, I think Jackie will put some of those links in the chat. The to-do list is very fun. Comes out every Tuesday. And here are some ways to keep in touch with Issa on Instagram, and another link to buy her book. We're all about the links here. So any final words, Issa, for tonight?
No, I just want to thank all of you for being here. This is an ongoing conversation. Like I said, sadly, there will be more grief, right? Like, we're at that age, sadly, where there's always going to be something. And so having these kinds of conversations in an ongoing, way is helpful, because this is kind of not a one and done thing, right? Like, this is a constant sort of expression of our humanity, right? I say all the time, grief is the price we pay for love, right? We love people, we love animals, we loved our jobs that we lost, or there right now in the world there are people who are grieving their homelands, right? Like, I mean,
exactly. Yeah. How do we not mention Ukraine? Right. Exactly.
Like, there are people who are grieving their homelands. There are people who are grieving so much. And so I wrote this book because I'm a writer, and I wrote this book because I needed to write this book. But the main reason I wrote this book is for the community, to build community, not around grief, because that feels kind of maudlin and sort of macabre, but around the expression of that humanity. Grief is an expression of our humanity, and it is something that has been so sublimated and relegated to the darkness. And I don't think that that's where it belongs. I think it belongs out in the light of day. And so I absolutely welcome everyone here to reach out to me and to stay connected. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, have a wonderful night and we'll be in touch.
Yes,
Talk
absolutely.
soon.
Night,
See y'all
everyone.
later. Good night.